Well, hello again, everybody. And I've already weighed up on this subject of the drones on the Thomas Sheridan regular channel, but this is Beyond Room 313 channel, which is generally the one I devote to 14 topics, the channels, that is. And so, for those of you who may have missed the first video, that was done on Not Quite the Witching Hour, and I've also spoke about it in my interview with Neil MacDonald. I want to further clarify my beliefs and my why I think this way about these UAPs, drones, or whatever you want to call them. Now, yeah, it's a real phenomenon. It's really is a paranormal, Fortean, supernatural thing, and it's nothing new. In the past, our ancestors would have called them fairies, goblins, spook lights, earth lights, demons, and we're now calling them. Well, one time we called them Marian apparitions. Another time we called them black helicopters, and another time we called them flying saucers, and now we're calling them UAPs and now drones. Now, this may seem preposterous to a person who's either in the mainstream things that everything to do with this is like either government black ops. Sometimes it is though, and or aliens from space. And there's both within the alternative and within the media, mainstream media, there is a deliberate and purposeful agenda to have you only thinking space aliens, and and disclosure will bring us into that, or government secret psyops, and your tax dollars are being wasted on these weapons and so on. What they never ever have you thinking about is what this really is. Now, how can I actually say, good thing you're saying this up, how are you saying this, Thomas, with such, conviction and confidence that that is not either one of those two things? So quite simply because there's a vast canon of literature on this stuff that goes right back to our ancient ancestors, that these things appear in the sky, sometimes on the ground, and they take forms and shapes which our minds can rationalize, can comprehend. They try to, but they often fail. They mimic. And I'll talk about that a bit later on. Now, why do I not think there's aliens from outer space? Quite simply, there's zero evidence that aliens from another planet have ever visited this world. Like Jacques Vallée said in Passport to Magonia, he said the UFO space alien visitor thing only exists because of the popularity of science fiction within popular culture. If our popular culture didn't have science fiction stories and instead had fairy stories or something else like that, or instead of just like say something else completely different, like the visitors our science fiction or our lore was based on people living inside the earth, they'd be from the inner earth. So people think space aliens only because of Star Trek and Buck Rogers and old Flash Gordon movies and this kind of thing. That's how they became associated. This is why the first ever real flap of these things in the modern era were called ghost rockets, and they appeared over Scandinavia almost instantaneously following Parsons and Hubbard's Moonchild working in the Mojave Desert, which amazingly, when they got back to the Agape Lodge in Pasadena, there was Marjorie Cameron waiting for them, Parsons' future wife, who was exactly the Babylon to create the Moonchild that he had envisioned based on a picture on the cover of a book. And amazingly, even more so, she was one of the first, if not the first person in the United States to make an official report of having seen a flying saucer. Now, you think you live in an ordinary world and everything is like straight up in black and white. You most certainly do not. And this is what you should be taking from these things. It's one more, you should be feeling very privileged to live in a time when these things are happening in New Jersey. I know I am, because it's just part of this magical wonder that this realm that we inhabit is filled with mysteries and makes us feel this way. It makes us feel like this sense of wonder. Those of you who think now, why is it not a government site? It's too big, it's too complex. They don't have that kind of technology. And when people say, oh, they do, here's a patent from something that said a drone that came out of the sea that was patented in 2016. Listen, millions and millions and millions and millions of things get patented, right? Every year. Just because someone went down to the patent office with some drawings and a basic outline and paid the fee doesn't mean that ever went into production or ever was actually utilized. So these people whip out patents to prove all kinds of things. That means nothing. And I think, it just means nothing. It's only what they put into development. Also, this may come as a shock to some of you, the people behind the Black Ops aren't down at the patent office. Now, where we can find things where, like the gateway process, where the CIA and US military looked into the supernatural, what they discovered was it really does exist. What did they do with it? Nothing, because they couldn't fully understand how it worked. And this is what's really going on. The reason why the US government is silent about it is because they do know what it is, what I'm talking about, these manifestations, but they can't explain it. They don't know how it works. It's a complete mystery to them, and they're not going to sit there and tell them it's a paranormal event created by your consciousness resolving an uncanny valley experience into something that is collapsing the wave function and the matter and the energy around it in order to create a telepathic resolution in your mind that you can hopefully understand. No, the average public couldn't understand that. And a lot of politicians and scientists can't understand it either because they wouldn't have the intelligence to be there. They're so in the system. So it's not that either. There's just too much of it now. There's just too much. And they don't have any. I mean, why? That's the whole thing is like they use direct energy weapons to attack the United States. Why? You use it on your enemies. People, and then here's a patent for it. The usual thing. Don't be so negative and don't be so angry about these things. Often think to yourself, am I being exposed to something that's remarkable? And I should marvel at the experience and feel blessed that I'm getting to see it. That's what you should do. Now, secondly, thirdly, we'll continue on this conversation. In Walter Evans Wentz's seminal work on the fairy fate of Ireland and the Celtic countries, it's online. You can get the PDF. You can buy the book easy enough, cheap enough. There are numerous accounts of fairy lore, and this book actually became possibly the framework for Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée, and Vallée, however you pronounce his name, constantly cites this book throughout all his work, really. And Evans Wentz was an American who was the first, quite a brilliant man. He was the first American to go to Tibet and basically he didn't become a monk in the monasteries, but he got involved in that. And he actually the first Westerner to translate the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He was also in 1911, he went to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, and Brittany and Cornwall, and he compiled the fairy folklore of those lands. Now, within the fairy folklore of those lands, and also in other countries too, it wouldn't be just the Celtic world, the Nordic world has it too, and everywhere. It's just that being an oral tradition in Ireland was and Scotland and England and Wales to a lesser extent, things were spoken about in people's homes and houses, experiences, and they often weren't written down. If you go over my Thomas Sheridan channel, there's an interview with John Farrelly, who's released a wonderful book on the fairies. And we just spoke about that. Like a lot of these things were not actually written down until somebody went and interviewed these people, i.e., it was Evans Wentz or William Butler Yeats or Lady Gregory. Until then, they were just spoken about in oral tradition, were not bothered to be written down. Newspapers wouldn't cover them, or periodicals weren't interested at the time. It was considered peasant beliefs until these clever people realized that there was something to these peasant beliefs that was worth noting. So anyway, we have a situation now. So Evans Wentz, all through the book, talks about fairy lights constantly, that the fairies are often seen as lights in the sky. He reports one thing from a county clerk, I think it was in Tuam in County Galway, who talks about right before the famine happened in 1847, the fairies were having battles in the sky. And people in the west of Ireland saw this and knew that this would lead to maladies on this earth, so what happens with the fairy world is reflected on the earthly world. And another thing was that there was a belief in, you see them all coming out of sea at the moment, and there's two gentlemen in Long Island who have been studying them now for 2 years, and it turns out now that the flap began in early 2020. Now, those of you who remember the Rona Chronicles, how many times did I say during the early days of lockdown, why does this feel like it's something to do with space or something supernatural? And why did I constantly need to use Lovecraft or Doctor Who or Nigel Neal, dystopian sci-fi things to try and deal with this? So yeah, there was major sightings of these in rural America, in Colorado, and the U.S. government investigated it. And one of the things they said, basically, the conclusion they came to was, let's hope it doesn't happen over a major built-up area and people actually notice in large numbers. Guess what happened? New Jersey, okay, have the most densely populated state in the United States, in the U.S. There's something like 27 odd million people or something. That's very heavily populated. It's a very small state. So we have this situation now. It's everywhere. Texas, California, Britain, everywhere now. And this whole thing, it's over air bases. No, that's not true. It's everywhere. And also not, and even with that, yeah, it is over them, but they're not causing them. And also, the United States is full of military bases. They're everywhere. You could throw a dart or a map of the United States, and I guarantee you it would be very close to where there's a military base. So it's not that. So it's this again. They changed their form. So well, think about a fairy, right? Think about a fairy. It looks like a human, but it's not fully resolved, is it? It's too short. It's often has funny features like really big noses, big ears, a really long pointed chin. It's never quite right. It's like a human. It's like a pastiche of a human being, as if someone made it out of clay. Well, are these things alive and conscious? They may well be. I'm still out on the fence with that one. As it stands, I think they kind of are, but it's also somehow wired into our conscious perception that takes us outside the space-time continuum of our brain, and this is why this is what like demonology is basically based completely on this. That's what it is. And so we were so you're a farmer in Ireland in the 1800s, and you see a strange light or have a strange experience, and suddenly you see a fairy. Okay, they resolve themselves in a telepathic form into a little man. So it's a goblin in Scandinavia, and there's all kinds of other things all over there. Mothman's a classic. Mothman's an absolute classic. Well, so I say, what was Mothman trying to look like? Maybe an owl. And also, I have a theory that the Mothman thing happened as the Batman thing was really big. And if you look at Batman's original outfit on the TV show, Batman wore a gray outfit. And what color was the Mothman? Gray. And so, maybe the entity or the telepathic form was trying to mimic Batman, this kind of thing. It's always trying to mimic and fool humans, or maybe we're fooling ourselves. We may be generating these forms, and this is what bothers me about the whole ufology and thing and everything, and the whole study of this stuff is this incredible narrow-mindedness of it, and how they do not, like, for instance, I'd probably put myself up there as on ufology in its true sense, what I'm talking about in this video. Would I ever be invited to any of the conferences around the world to speak about this? No, because they want to hear about spacemen. Why? Well, because they grew up on Star Wars and Flash Gordon. It's as simple as that. And that's why they believe it's all spacemen and contactees, and we're going to be rescued from other planets by the Pleiadians and all this stuff. They don't want to hear about things as sophisticated as fairy folklore. This is why they don't like Jacques Vallée. They never liked John Keel, and they hated Rosemary Ellen Guiley, because those three people told them what it really was. It's some kind of folkloric thing. I mean, and this is the kind of stuff that I was born for. When Venice from Magical Egypt I couldn't think of a term for what I am. She said, "You're a folklorist." And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I am. And this is folklore. So in the past, they tried to look like spiritual beings. The Fatima, the only comparable thing to what we're having now, and it's still small by today's standards, is the Fatima event in Portugal in 1917, and it also in Passport to Magonia. There's Jacques Vallée was one of the few people that actually give a proper eyewitness, non-Jesuit editorialized eyewitness account of what happened. And one of them was a young boy who was something like 11 miles away from the miracle of the sun, but saw the miracle of the sun, and spoke about how he was profoundly weirded out by it. And lots of people said they were weirded out by it. And this is what we're hearing about in New Jersey and the other places where they're appearing. that these people feel weirded out and unsettling. And the classic thing is, how come you zoom in, you don't get a clear photograph? Because it's not actually there. This form or whatever it is, this entity, this thing, is collapsing reality around itself, and it's trying to self-assemble a form in which we can actually recognize them as. So now it's trying to be a tulpa of a drone. In previous times, it tries to be a black helicopter, and you zoom in and they all are fuzzy and you can't take clear pictures of them. Other times, it's like you have ghost rockets. It was another one, and then you have all kinds of things. It pulls all or maybe we even do it, like maybe we have, these things, because apparently they show up on certain kind of cameras that operate outside the human spectrum, and they vanish into it because the two guys in Long Island have bought a very expensive camera. They're doing proper like citizen science. Now we know that science is completely corrupt. We now, not like citizen journalists, we now have citizen scientists doing real science. And they were looking at this thing through this, they shone a flashlight at it, and it vanished into their visible eye, but appeared on the on the camera that could see outside the human visual spectrum. So this how similar to that is the island off the coast here in Sligo between Inishmurray and Grange, which is right where at the heart of like fairy folklore in Ireland is. There was a belief in a secret island where these fairy lights came out of the sea and came to land. And what are we seeing, or didn't come, came out of sea and came inland? What are we seeing in the New Jersey videos? Fairy lights coming out of sea and going inland and disappearing back into the sea. So this is this is astounding stuff. But it's not new. We've been here before. But people aren't educated into this because they think space dudes from outer space, because of awful TV shows like Ancient Aliens and Nick Pope and Stephen Greer and the rest of them, who are all out there telling about they say nothing. When you listen to those people, they say nothing, right? Those of you who probably listened to them for years and may have stumbled on this video have probably gotten more of an education on this phenomena from whatever the 10 minutes of this video I've just done already than you've ever got from them saying the same things for the last 30, 40 years. Think about that. And why do you think they say the same nothings all these times? Because they have nothing to say about this. They just are just pulled out by the media as their go-to guys to apply a stereotypical, overcoating of the story that keeps them on TV and keeps everyone believing that maybe aliens are real and there's going to be disclosure. But space aliens, I mean, they're never going to tell you what they're real. They're never going to tell you what this is a folk phenomenon. This is a folk. We are witnessing modern folklore emerging before our eyes in real time. Some of these videos are astounding, including the one where the little girl says, "I love you," and the thing blinks back. Now, it doesn't mean it's a fairy of love and light. It's quite sinister, actually. It's like the whole thing, a demon will tell you what you want to hear. So you have to be careful like that. When I say demons, I don't actually mean evil, but what are fairies? Fairies are tricksters. What are demons? Demons are tricksters. And in the Middle Ages, these would have been very much part of demonology. And there's lots of stories of history. The classic ones would be the airships that appeared in mid-late Victorian America. Endless stories of airships, of these really strange airships, like very steampunky airships that flew over America. The same thing as the UAPs now. I think that was actually what inspired Charles Fort to become his 40 himself and write the Book of the Damned. This stuff is fantastic. It's so interesting. It's so marvelous in a true marveling sense. And it's something you should be throwing yourself into and really saying, this is phenomenal. Not thinking it's, Elon Musk is using his brother's drones to put a microchip in your head. Stay away from all these doomers, okay? Stay away from all these doom gurus, that only give you a reason to like basically kill yourself and nothing else, that everything's a psyop and there's no hope. Stay away from them. Take comfort in the fact that there's things appearing in the sky in New Jersey right now that the so-called elites don't know what they are. And that gives us a tremendous advantage over them because they can't control the narrative as good on that as they used to. Now, you can approach this any way you want, but I'm not going to listen to people who've seen a couple of UFO documentaries, watched a season of Ancient Aliens, and saw some space movie, some rubbish movie like Arrival, and then tell me they know it all. You don't know it all. If you study this stuff, you do know it all. It's like the only, I know it's very difficult for you to accept this because you have this kind of like, but that's how it is. You have my friends Kate and Dr. Neil Rushton over at Hare and the Hawthorne, and they say, they talk about like sightings of fairies. What's the English type fairy? Not a dwarf, not a goblin. Gnomes at this place in Nottinghamshire in England, and some of the people saw them as Noddy driving his car. Now, Noddy was a gnome that was a little cartoon book character in England back in the 1930s and 40s. And what did they see? They saw Noddy. They saw Noddy. The thing appeared to them as Noddy. And this is what happens. They appear to what you expect. Now, and then we talk about things like alien abduction experiences. They're identical to people who've been taken by the fairies. It's exactly the same. Like the inside of the spaceships are all dirty and unhygienic. Fairyland is dirty and unhygienic. There's missing time on both things. There's violations of the body. There's also this weird thing of falling in love with the captors, like like an interdimensional Stockholm syndrome. Okay, so that's what's going on with New Jersey. I've waited all my life for this to happen. I never thought it would happen. I've waited for all my life for an event like this to happen, and I never thought this would actually happen in my life. Then I feel very privileged, and so should you, to be around and see this. So don't believe the mainstream hype, and don't believe in a lot of the UFO cultic, you know, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine conference scene. They all have a vested interest in keeping the space aliens thing going because it's very lucrative for them. Okay, they don't want people coming to their conferences saying, "Well, it's really about folklore and it's really connected to fairies and things." They don't want to hear that. They only want to hear about spacemen from outer space coming to save us from global warming or nuclear catastrophes. They don't want anything adult and mature to talk about it. So there you go. The UAPs are modern folklore coming from the same trajectory as fairies, demons, black helicopters, Marian apparitions, ancient spaceships, Mothman. Now, some people have said to me, are they here to be a portent of something dark that's coming? I don't know. I really don't know. But they could definitely be a manifestation of subconscious fears within people, because that seems to trigger them. Like demonic possession generally happens when someone is going through a difficult time, emotional difficult time, and their psychic firewall is down, and this entity comes into them, or this demon thing activates inside them, however that works. Seems to be the same with the UFO thing. I always remember years ago, excuse me, and if you really want some good information on this, the best stuff I'm reading is there's a channel called News Nation that's doing great reports on this stuff. They're not, and they're on the fence very much, but they're not like playing the spaceman government side thing completely. And they're interviewing people like those guys from Long Island. Read the comments on those videos, and you're seeing modern folklore appearing before you, giving us statements almost identical to the accounts written down by Evans Wentz back in 1911 by people living in rural Ireland and rural Scotland and rural Wales and rural Cornwall. You're very lucky to be seeing this. You should be enjoying it. So keep watching the skies and the earth.